Welcome everyone to the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. Today we'll be talking about maximizing volunteer engagement. I'm Minnie Chen and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. Let's get started. This webinar is part of the Collaborative Mentoring webinar series, which is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention through the National Mentoring Resource Center and facilitated in partnership with Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. These webinars would not be possible without the planning team, which includes the mentoring partnerships shown on this slide. In addition to this webinar series, the NMRC provides resources for mentoring practitioners. At the end of this webinar, we'll provide more details about how you can access this no-cost support and resources. Before we get started, I wanted to share some housekeeping information. In 1 week, you'll receive an email with information about how to download a copy of these slides and view the webinar recording. You can access the information directly by going to Mentor's website in the next week. And to continuously improve this series, we're looking for your input. A short survey will pop up as you exit the webinar. Please take 3 minutes to give us your feedback. We want this to be a participatory experience, so please use the question box to ask questions throughout the webinar. I will be queuing up questions to share with panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We may not get to all questions because there are several hundred of you on this webinar, but we will do our best. The questions that we share with our panelists are generally ones that broaden or deepen the conversation. First, to get a sense of who is with us today, we have 3 short polls. I'll give you all about 10 more seconds. Okay, so it seems like in the experience level in the mentoring field, we have majorities. They're about 60% experienced and 31 beginner. On to the next poll. What is your role in the mentoring field? We have 62% practitioners and 22 other. Our last poll question is, do you currently engage volunteers in roles outside of mentoring? And if you answered yes, we would love you to tap kind of in the chat box. What are the roles you engage your volunteers? Feel free to write in the chat box what are the roles you engage your volunteers in so we can kind of get an idea of who we have joining us today. Okay, we can always come back to the chat box later. Let's move along. So for today's webinar, we will be discussing maximizing volunteer engagement. We know that many of you are skilled at managing and engaging volunteer mentors, but today we want to discuss what are the ways you can engage volunteers in different diverse roles across the organization outside of mentoring. This strategy has many benefits. You can engage folks who may not be well suited to be mentors, who might have a lack of time or lack of interest and skill, but want to engage and support your organization in other ways. On the flip side, you may not be able to rely on them in the same ways you can with paid staff. You'll hear more from our panelists about these different ways you can engage volunteers in different capacities to strengthen your organization, as well as the challenges associated with this and how to overcome them. Along with me, we have two panelists who will be joining us for today's webinar. First, we have David Martus, the Director of Youth Initiatives at the Michigan Community Service Commission. The Michigan Community Service Commission provides support and infrastructure for a vast array of community service initiatives in the state of Michigan, with a particular focus on mentoring through Mentor Michigan, which is a program of the Commission that focuses on supporting more than 250 mentoring organizations across the state. Dave will be able to speak about the broad array of volunteer opportunities available, including and beyond traditional mentoring, and how his organization supports mentoring programs with volunteer engagement statewide. Our second panelist is Eric Mintzer, the Director of Volunteers at Minds Matter Chicago. Eric will share how his primarily volunteer-run organization engages volunteers in a wide variety of roles to support the organization operations and the challenges that come with having an organization almost entirely run by volunteers. We hope you'll leave with lots of ideas about how your mentoring program can expand the way you think about volunteer engagement and the potential of your volunteers.
Before we move on, we can share some of the comments that came in the chat box, just sharing the different ways that you all are currently engaging volunteers. So thank you so much for everyone who introduced themselves and who shared some ideas to kind of lay the groundwork for today's conversation. So it sounds like many of you are engaging your volunteers currently outside of mentoring in fundraising events, committee work, family greeters, so family coordinators, a lot of events and mentor recruitment. Looks like folks are engaging volunteers as tutors, a lot of event volunteers, service projects for families such as home repairs, and then skill-based technical work such as computer work and office work. Even some folks who are engaging volunteers as cooks for events and for special opportunities for families, board members, and in advocacy. So that's just a taste of what you all contributed, and thank you so much for sharing just some of the examples that you have from your work every day.
Thank you, Delia. That is Delia Hagan, also from Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, who will be joining us and helping moderate the questions. Just to further ground our conversation, I want to introduce this volunteer involvement framework published from the RGK Center for Philanthropy and Community Service. This is from their Strategic Volunteer Engagement Guide for Nonprofit and Public Sector Leaders. As this chart shows, there are two axes of volunteer engagement. This guide kind of goes more into the different ways you can engage volunteers and how there are several potential opportunities for your volunteers to kind of be engaged with your organization depending on their connection to service and kind of the connection that they have to your organization, as well as the time for service. So depending if it's just an episodic kind of one-time engagement opportunity or something more long-term. You will hear more examples of each from Dave and Eric today. We highly recommend you to check out this resource where you can access the completed chart if you are interested. We have also included the link to the guide at the bottom of this slide, and we'll again include the link to the full guide at the end of this webinar. Now I will turn it to our first panelist, David.
Hi, everybody. This is David Martus. I'm the Director of Youth Initiatives for the Michigan Community Service Commission. You can read about me there. I just have more than 20 years of leadership experience in positive youth development programming. Just direct and manage Mentor Michigan, along with a statewide initiative effort by overseeing volunteer recruitment efforts, coordinating training and technical assistance, and maintaining outreach efforts. So that's enough about me. Let's get on with it. The reason that you tuned in. Thank you kindly to Mentor. Thank you for Minnie and Delia being on here as well. And I know Eric is going to provide a lot of quality information as well. So thank you kindly. And yeah, next slide. So Michigan Community Service Commission. We are the community service, utilize service as a strategy to address Michigan's most pressing issues and empower volunteers to strengthen communities. I think many might have mentioned that. We've been around for 20 plus years. Since 1991, we've invested more than $100 million in the community for volunteer initiatives that have leveraged in excess of $85 million in local funds and engaged more than 1 million people in volunteerism and impacted critical issues such as disaster preparedness, education, foreclosure, healthcare, and the environment. So we've shown really that the people who are willing to give their time and services to others can truly make a difference in the state of Michigan. One of our signature programs as well is Mentor Michigan. We've added the plus there because we feel that the youth initiatives aspect of mentoring is robust and needs to be addressed as well to positively impact and influence young lives. So Mentor Michigan historically began Jennifer Granholm, former Governor Granholm, in 1999. She was the Attorney General. Then she was elected governor. And her husband, Daniel Mulhern, was huge into mentoring. And that's kind of what springboarded Mentor Michigan into essentially what we are now. So Mentor Michigan will lead Michigan communities to create meaningful and lasting relationships between youth and mentors. And Mentor Michigan Plus will equip Michigan communities with the programs, resources, and empower their youth. So as Mentor Michigan, the state affiliate, we're only one of a few that are embedded within a state government or commission. So there's benefits and challenges, but certainly the benefits outnumber the challenges. And most individuals, the volunteers, are looking to make a difference in or give back in their communities. So I'm going to share with you a few of the ways that MCSC helps organizations in Michigan get the most out of their volunteers. So hopefully you can find comparable assets in your state to help maximize volunteer engagement. So next slide, please. All right. As I mentioned, being embedded in the state government, the benefits of that, we have the governor's engagement. We just have a new governor that began, Jennifer Whitmer. Governor Whitmer just began, and she is committed to service, so we're extraordinarily excited about that. But the engagement of the governor's office and supporting Michigan in service is critically important to this. One of the areas, we have the Governor's Service Awards. I'll touch on that a little bit later, just recognizing and being conscious of the great work that Michiganders are doing throughout Michigan, with the support of the governor and launching a corporate volunteer council. So the council will support large and small businesses with making an impact in their communities and state through volunteerism. Expanding state employee volunteer program, that will be huge as well. The department directors will be invited to appoint individuals to serve on task forces that ultimately support state employees in volunteering. This is something that creating a new Governor Youth Volunteer Award with the help of a technology platform will create a service resume for youth. Also supporting Youth with Mentor Michigan connects youth to mentors and helps them access life opportunities and tools to be successful. And then we have the governor's support through MCSC with times of disasters and emergencies. So MCSC supports volunteerism, donations, management during times of disaster, works with the state police response effort to engage volunteers to serve in recovery as well. One of the initiatives that we have is Volunteer Michigan. Volunteer Michigan is the newest initiative that we have for our signature program. It encompasses a number of unique volunteer engagement strategies, strategies that seek to more effectively leverage Michigan's volunteers by commissioning a number of different volunteer recruitment and engagement tools. Volunteer Michigan targets specific and sometimes underutilized volunteer populations. That's what we feel is really important. A lot of populations that are underutilized from becoming volunteers. These include youth, then highly skilled professionals and trying to find where they fit, as well as seniors. So these recruitment engagement tools include youth service and service learning as well, the VGF, Volunteer Generation Fund, service project mini grants, service collaboratives, and national days of service, and other volunteer promotion efforts. Through the employment of each of these different methods, Volunteer Michigan strives to tap each of the state's volunteer resources and ultimately increase the number of volunteers in Michigan. So this part right here, just Volunteer Michigan, strategies for engagement, what we do throughout the state to try to make certain that volunteers are engaged with where they're serving. So the National Days of Service, MLK Day just wrapped up, and within Michigan we had 24 projects throughout the state. We had roughly 2,500 volunteers, and those volunteers served 9,000 plus hours. So that's something that we're heavily involved with from an engagement standpoint and reaching out. We provide assistance to organizations that have ideas for Martin Luther King Jr. National Day of Service, as well as Global Youth Service Day and September 11th National Day of Service and Remembrance. So those are critical for a strategy that we have for engagement. And then training and capacity building in collaboration with state partners, volunteer centers in Michigan. Volunteer Michigan offers training and capacity building for the volunteer centers. So this training and capacity building ensures infrastructure is increased in communities, allowing more citizens ultimately to be engaged as volunteers. And as I mentioned before, we think this is extremely important, is youth service and service learning. So building a lifelong dedication to volunteering. We think when younger individuals are exposed to this at an early age, they can carry them through the adulthood and just begin fostering that heart of service. So establishing community collaboratives, that's important as well. Encouraging nonprofits and other service organizations to partner together to improve the use of volunteers and leverage resources. So Volunteer Michigan helps communities to more effectively address those needs. So we think that that's really important as well, is that community collaboration is very important. If you could please change to the next slide as well, be appreciative. So the map there, the state of Michigan, now affectionately referred to as the mitten in many instances, but you can see that we have the state of Michigan broken down into 10 those regional prosperity zones. And when I mentioned the community collaboratives, we feel that this is an important way to find out what's happening in those communities and then to address those needs. So we wanted to hear from a diverse group of community leaders to see how service and volunteerism addressed Michigan's toughest challenges. So we finished in November with listening tours. We went to each of those prosperity zones just to find out what's happening within there. So the listening tour allowed the leaders to share their thoughts, how volunteers and national service as well can help address the state's biggest issues. Participants discussed community challenges, just different ways to improve the quality of life for residents. Individuals that participated also explored methods to collaborate and share resources. So this was an excellent opportunity for individuals to come together, find commonality, and work towards solutions. So the input gathered from the tour helps shape the future of Michigan volunteerism and our national service plan. As the participants generated ideas that we're including in our new state service plan. So on this, there is the map, but next to that, the volunteer generation fund that we have. You think about the many challenges Michigan we're experiencing, but not exclusively in Michigan. I know throughout the country, it's probably a common theme with growing needs and just shrinking financial resources make it crucial to create innovative ways to solve these challenges. So national service, AmeriCorps, our VISTA initiative, that's one way. But we also have what's called the Volunteer Generation Fund, VGF. So the goals of the Volunteer Generation Fund, assist nonprofit, faith-based, other civic organizations by expanding and improving the capacity of organizations to utilize volunteers, to spur innovation in volunteer recruitment and management practices, and enable the people of the United States to effectively change by participating in active volunteer and citizen service. So ours, in particular, we were fortunate enough to receive a Volunteer Generation Fund grant through the Corporation for National Community Service. And we'll focus on two initiatives to meet the goals of expanding volunteerism throughout the state. So increasing the number of volunteers recruited, including skill-based volunteers through employee and youth volunteer programs that share and utilize best practices and collaborate to meet community needs. And then just strengthen the capacity and infrastructure of nonprofits by identifying resources and collaborating regionally. I mentioned on the regional prosperity map, to meet compelling needs and enhance the utilization of best practices in recruiting and managing volunteers. So most individuals, going back to what I said at the beginning, most individuals would reply, they're volunteering. Why are you volunteering? I'm volunteering to make a difference or give back to the community. That would be the most likely response. So out of that, logic would then dictate that in order to have engaged volunteers that stick around for a while, they need to feel that their work is having an effective and meaningful impact. So in order to do that, just emphasize volunteer engagement as opposed to volunteer management, I think is good. Creating meaningful tasks is critically important. And making certain volunteers have a choice and they can select tasks that they enjoy. I think it's also important from a communication standpoint. I was just thinking, there's a friend of mine, he has been involved, he has a huge heart of service. I'm from the Flint, Michigan area, and you look at a lot of boards he's on, and just financially he's fortunate enough to assist a lot of these organizations, but his two sons graduated with my son, and they went to opposite ends of the country to school. So they're out of the house. They were twins, and he doesn't have that anymore. So he was always looked at as somebody that was financially supporting organizations, being on boards. But then somebody thought, well, man, he's missing his kids. Well, why not mentor? So he became a mentor through Flint's area Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and is absolutely loving it because he missed his kids so badly. So that's something as well. I think communication and just being in tune with your volunteers is critically important. Of course, providing a ton of support. Communication is very important. One thing that we do, I just wanted to touch on this again. So we have the Governor's Service Awards, recognizing the impact citizens have in their own communities and state. I think that's very important as well. And most of the volunteers that you're working with, and they appreciate that, but that's not why they're in this. But I think it creates such a good storytelling moment. And the Governor's Service Awards that we have, I mean, it's huge. And the ones that win, it's so meaningful to them. And a lot of good stories come out of that as well. So I know I blew through this pretty quickly, and there were some areas that I would have wanted to spend more time with, but please, I think contact information for me will be available at the end. So time is limited, but thank you for all you do to help make the world a better place. And there was resources that were provided, and any area that I verbally mentioned or anything that's a resource that is included, please send me an email. I'd love to discuss with you further. So thank you very kindly.
Thank you so much, Dave, for sharing more about the different community service initiatives throughout the state of Michigan. Before we move on to our second panelist, Eric, Delia here has some more responses and will share some more examples about how you all kind of engage volunteers.
Yeah, what a great source of information our audience is today, because you guys shared so many different examples. We want to give you another chance to hear from each other. So here are some more examples from you. We have some folks on the webinar today who use volunteers to serve on scholarship committees for their program. So if they have a scholarship, for a college scholarship, reviewing applications. We have someone who uses a volunteer to work on their website. Someone who's engaging volunteers to inform their program design. A couple of folks who are talking about how they engage adults who aren't really ready for a long-term commitment to a young person in one-off activities like career fairs or career days, which I love. I love that recommendation because I think that's a great way to give people opportunities to engage in a way that they really can manage. Someone else said we have lots of different possibilities for our volunteers: one-off, weekly, monthly, and daily, which is incredible. Also, facilitating activities for non-matched youth who are waiting on the wait list. We know that can be a huge challenge for mentoring programs. So some folks are using volunteers to help organize activities to continue to engage those young people, which is such a great way to kind of kill two birds with one stone. And finally, we've got some folks who have craft days facilitated by volunteers. Another one I love is mentors who are helping run trainings for other new mentors, which is such a great way to engage, trainers or mentors as trainers. And then finally, kind of drawing on the language abilities of volunteers, helping connect mentors with opportunities to facilitate bilingual meetings with parents when, that language isn't represented on staff. So great ideas. Thanks everybody for contributing.
Great. And now just a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type your questions in the questions box, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And now I can introduce our next panelist, Eric Mintzer, who is talking about his experience with Minds Matter Chicago.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Delia and Minnie, for introducing me to this webinar and organization, and also David for a great talk and perspective that I know I don't really see from my role with Minds Matter. So very different, a lot of stuff to consider. So I am, name's Eric. I live in Chicago, and I've volunteered for Minds Matter Chicago for the past 5 years. I have been a mentor from the start, continue to be a mentor, and actually the picture of me here is with my first mentee from a few years ago when she was graduating high school. But for the past 2 years, I've served as our director of volunteers, and what this entails is a lot of recruiting activities for volunteers, which involves both outreach and also the selection process for volunteers. And also overseeing our volunteer training program and running the social and networking events for our volunteers. Feel free to contact me. I put my email here. I think it might be sent in an email after the webinar, but happy to answer any questions about what I talk about or about our organization. So Minds Matter Chicago is part of Minds Matter, which is a national organization that manages 14 individual chapters across the U.S. I have our mission statement here, which it's easier to explain. What our goal is to help close the gap that exists between, that's created by students coming from low-income families in terms of college access and college success. So there are a lot of ways in which low-income students are hindered in terms of, college. We focus mainly on how can we get students into college, how can we get them into the right school, and how can we prepare them, and increase the chances that they eventually graduate college. So Minds Matter Chicago was founded in 2006. We served we're serving 63 students this year with an average family income of $24,000. And all the students are high achieving. And we have a selective process for which students we allow into our program. Just because we're such a small organization, we can only help so many students. And we really focus on students who show that they have the ability and the motivation to attend and graduate from a four-year school. If we expand, there'll be tons and tons of students who qualify for this. So unfortunately, we can't accept them all right now, but one of our goals is to increase the amount of students we help. But over the course of our 13 years in existence, 100% of our students have gone to a four-year school. And we've done this with only one part-time employee, and right now about 200 volunteers, mostly young professionals, an annual budget of around $200,000. So we're definitely not a large organization, but we're pretty efficient and are pretty much entirely volunteer run. Next slide. So just to go over what our mentoring program entails, just to give you some background. So students enter our program and stay in it for their sophomore, junior, and senior years of high school, and they attend Saturday sessions throughout the academic year, which are held in downtown Chicago at a central location. So the first 2 hours of session is SAT and ACT prep up until the time they take their final SAT exam their senior year. And then we transition into 2 hours of mentoring. So for the first 2 hours, the students are in groups of 5 to 6 per instructor, whereas during the mentoring session, we assign 2 mentors for every student. And ideally, these 2 mentors will be paired with the student up until the student graduates high school. So they'll get to know them over the course of a couple years and be able to help them, more and more as they get to know them more. Our mentoring sessions are very structured. We don't just pair, mentors and mentees up and let them, talk and sit together and do whatever they want. We have a reading, writing, and thinking curriculum, which provides, some lessons and just a basic framework that, allows a mentor-mentee relationship to really be productive. We also bring in motivational speakers. We bring in other kind of practical, speakers, such as, we bring one of the admissions officers from University of Chicago to talk to the students every year. And actually, one way we engage our mentors in a different role, slightly different, is to have college and career panels, about 2 times a year, where some of our volunteers talk about their college and career experiences, just to give students a bit more, knowledge of, different careers, just because you might not be able to get all that information from your own mentor. So the second aspect of our mentoring program is providing summer program access and funding for our sophomore and junior students. It's actually a requirement for all of our students to attend a summer program. All the programs are, educational focused, often take place in colleges, and they're fully funded by Minds Matter. This is most definitely our biggest expense on the students and in general. But mentors are tasked with helping the students select the programs that they want to go to and also filling out the applications. So in one way, it's a good way to practice for applying to college in their senior year, because generally the applications are pretty similar, but also it's a chance for the students to get to know take a course that they haven't taken before and explore what they might want to do in college in the future. Lastly, for the senior year, our mentors basically do this again, but for the college application process. So help the students pick what colleges to apply to, write the essays, fill out the applications. We help them a lot with finding scholarships and applying to financial aid, and also helping the students decide what school to go to based on the financial aid packages they get, the academic criteria of the schools and whatnot. So that's our mentoring program in a nutshell. What I want to talk a little bit more about is just how we're structured, because I think we're a little different than a lot of other organizations that were almost entirely volunteer run. So as I mentioned before, so I made a little graphic here just to try to visualize how we're structured. Not that it's a strict hierarchy or anything, but in the blue is kind of the national organization, which we don't really interact too much with. Mainly our management team president and the board interact with them. But really where our chapter starts is a board of directors. It's a group of, I think, 6 to 8 volunteers who most have some type of nonprofit or education experience, but definitely have some business experience and set the strategic vision for our organization. But they're not really involved in the operations, or daily operations are almost entirely run by our management team and our main groups of volunteers. I'd say about 95% of these volunteers be between the age of 20 and 35, full-time jobs, and strictly volunteer for us. So as I mentioned, our mentoring program is pretty involved. There are a lot of things going on. So there's a lot of organization required by our management team. And just running an organization in general takes a lot. So our management team takes roles varying from marketing to doing our finance, running our website, and collecting data on what we're doing and the outcomes of our students, designing our curriculum, and the role that I do is recruiting and recruiting our volunteers and make sure they have a good experience. So being on a management team is typically a 5 to 10 hour a week commitment. It varies throughout the year, but it is a pretty large commitment, especially if you already have another role within the organization. But we try to make it easier. We form what we call committees around some of these topics. So the volunteer management committee, which is the one that I lead, is in charge of mentor and all of our volunteer recruitment, management team recruitment, volunteer training, and some of the social networking events that we do. We consist of a couple people on our management team and also a couple committee members who are kind of like a management team light, where a lot of them are current mentors who can't quite contribute 5 to 10 hours a week in a volunteer role, but can contribute maybe like another 2 to 4 hours and kind of take a support role as opposed to a leadership role. And it makes a big difference when we've got 20 interviews to schedule in a week. Our management team can't handle that on their own. So we have some of our other volunteers help support us and do some of the interviews. So that's basically our management team. But the vast majority of our volunteers are either mentors, ACT, SAT test prep instructors, or associate board members. And the associate board is just the group that's in charge of our fundraising. There are about 30 volunteers who, they run our fundraising events. They look for corporate donations. A lot of them are responsible if they work at a company that may donate to our program or support us in some way. That associate board member might be responsible for communicating with that organization and at least putting us in contact with people we need to speak to make sure that we're, to see if we're eligible for sponsorship from them. They'll also help us with recruitment within the organization. Typically the two go hand in hand. If we recruit volunteers from our company, we're more likely to have them sponsor us. If they sponsor us, we're more likely to get volunteers. So two kind of complementary outcomes that we look for. A lot of our volunteers serve in multiple roles, whether it's as an associate board member and a management team member, a test prep instructor, and an associate board member. That we allow people to take multiple roles and also to switch between roles if they find one that's more interesting to them. We really want to make sure our volunteers are happy and also that they can contribute in a way that they feel like they'd like to. And for our management team recruitment, the first place we always go to for looking for people on our management team is our existing volunteers. And I'd especially mention, because our students are in the program for 3 years, once they graduate high school, they'll have 2 mentors who are no longer assigned to a student. This is usually a great time for us to see if they want to join our management team. They have some experience as a mentor. They've been in the program for a while, but they're free to move around the organization. And that's when I joined. My first student graduated high school. Someone came up to me, said, "Hey, do you want a different role?" And I was happy to take it. So it's kind of a natural progression for a lot of our volunteers who like our program and feel like it's worth investing more time in. So go to the last slide. Why do I think volunteers increase their engagement with us? What are some things our organization does well that allows us to really fill all these roles with mentors and other volunteers? One, we are a very lean organization, and especially our mentors get to see the direct impact of their work firsthand. They're working directly with students. They get to know them over the course of the 3 years and see them grow. So I think that just really helps them feel like the time they invest is valuable, which means that they're willing to invest more time in the future. And that the things we do, the mission statement of ours is a right one and worthy one. So another thing that we do well, I think, is admit that we don't always do well, and we'll on occasion be disorganized or send something late, have to correct something. Sometimes volunteers get a little frustrated with this. We're totally upfront about this in our interviews and when we get to know our volunteers before they decide to join. We say we do our best. We're a very effective organization, but you sometimes have to be patient with both us and just do your best to help out. And we generally do a good job, but occasionally we'll have a mistake, and we're ready to admit it. Most volunteers aren't too salty about it. Maybe 1 or 2 a year will complain or leave, but most of them are okay, and some even join our program and decide to volunteer in additional roles because they see the organizational need, and because we're honest about it and are looking to solve our problems. The next two reasons why I think volunteers increase their engagement are around the volunteer experience, making sure that they have a good experience. It's something we realized in the past 2 or 3 years that while our organization serves our students, it's really our mentors and test prep instructors who serve our students directly. So one of the main goals of our management team, in addition to serving our students, is also to serve our volunteers and make sure that they enjoy their time with us. Volunteers who stick around longer in our program are better volunteers, or better mentors, and they're willing to take on new roles, or help us in other ways. So the first thing we do is we've increased our training program to not only include the basics of how to mentor, ways to interact with students, but really going more in depth into the cultural, psychological barriers that affect our students. It really, I don't think it's overkill because I think it's important, but it is a lot of information for our mentors, and I think they appreciate it. And it's stuff that they didn't know beforehand, and helps them in their role as a mentor, and ultimately helps them understand our mission and feel like they are contributing something and making an impact on these students. Secondly, we have a large focus on fellowship, networking, and a social scene. Since so many of our volunteers are young professionals, it's something that's very important to people, especially a lot of people in Chicago come from different parts of the country, and it's volunteering is a great way to meet other people who you can develop friendships with and whatnot, or networking connections. So really take advantage of that and try to make sure that our volunteers not only enjoy volunteering with us, but also enjoy the people they're volunteering with. makes everyone happy to come in and stick around for longer. Yeah, I think having to spend more time with an organization is a lot easier when you know the people around you and can relate to them. So we have monthly happy hours. We have discussions after sessions strictly about mentoring, where we can talk about issues we've had and practices we should be using. A lot of our fundraising comes through our volunteers, and it's actually one way we ask for them to increase their engagement, strictly by coming to our fundraising events, getting a local business to donate a gift basket or whatnot that we can raffle off, or just inviting their friends and family to buy tickets to the event. That's often enough. But yeah, these events are really fun and help our volunteers just enjoy their time here and want to spend more time with Minds Matter. Another benefit of increasing engagement for volunteers is personal development. Because we don't have this huge staff that's working with us, there are a lot of responsibilities that are being doled out to volunteers, and it's a good opportunity for people to develop their personal skills and take on a new role that they don't have elsewhere. I could speak from my experience. I'm a trader for career. I trade currencies, stocks, and for Minds Matter, I do a lot of interviews. I have to talk to a lot of people, give talks like this, and send emails just back and forth. It's not stuff I do in my normal life, but it's actually, I think, a great experience for me and a great experience for a lot of our other volunteers who take on these management roles. And we just need to tell people, these are the responsibilities you're going to have, and they sign up. They want the responsibility. If they like the organization and feel like it's a role that they can help, they're often excited to take on that responsibility and see if they can do it. And lastly, we offer a lot of degrees of engagement for our volunteers. So it's not like you're a mentor one day and then have to go straight to joining our management team. As I said, there's the committee member role, which is kind of like a management team light, which does often transition into a full-time management role. But there are other ways we ask our volunteers to help. I mentioned the college and career panels, where they talk about their own personal experiences. We have volunteers talk to their companies for both recruiting and for fundraising, which many of our volunteers are excited and happy to do. So our volunteers are happy to plan events for us, whether it's a fundraising event. We had an event at Flywheel and Barry's Boot Camp where we raised some money and got all of our volunteers a discounted workout class, which a volunteer was happy enough to plan. Or an event with we had an event last summer with the a bunch of Duke alumni, just focused on raising money from Duke alumni to pay for students in our program who are attending the Duke summer program. A great way just to engage a new network and get our name out, and also we not only raised a good amount of money, but got some new volunteers, and the volunteer was happy to help and sticking with our program. So the last thing I want to address, maybe some possible drawbacks of using volunteers in these additional roles, especially in these kind of critical roles to the operations of our organization. There are definitely some drawbacks. So the first is just there's a limited amount of time any volunteer can spend as a volunteer. People have day jobs, people have other responsibilities, and we really have a tough time asking anyone to commit more than 10 hours a week to the organization. Even that is a lot of time. It's basically a part-time job. So it requires a lot of kind of logistics and planning to make sure that all of our tasks are distributed fairly, so that one person isn't responsible for everything and they fall behind. So that's part of the reason we have these committees to help split up the tasks. But it can be difficult to have to work with 10 people, whereas if you had a full-time staff, it might only require 2 people. So that's definitely a drawback. One of the bigger ones is uncertainty over the duration of a volunteer's ability to commit to the program. Just because it's a volunteer role, I think the length of stay at the organization is a bit shorter. We don't have any career volunteers. When it's unexpected, it could be very disruptive, and we all of a sudden lose one of our key people in the organization and have to replace them quick. But even when it's planned, it can be difficult because each management team member, each committee member has a lot of just knowledge of how to operate and how to complete their tasks, and we have to be very diligent with documenting everything we do so that when someone leaves, we don't lose passwords, we don't lose contacts with people in other organizations that we work with. So it does take a lot of planning and a little extra work than just executing the operations of program. And I just say because another issue with that is just we are almost entirely young professionals, so I think more than most people might have to move to another city on short notice, or you get married and all of a sudden don't have time to volunteer. It happens really frequently in all of our roles. We try to limit it within our management team, but it still happens a couple times a year. So it's just something to be prepared for. And lastly, it can be hard to find a fit for certain roles. So something like volunteer management, there aren't many specific skills, so that's why it was a good fit for me. But something more professional focus, like finding a graphic designer, copywriter, someone who knows finance and can do the accounting for our organization. That can be a little tougher. It helps that we have 150 or so volunteers, 200 volunteers who we can draw on. We ask all our volunteers when they join what their professional background is, just so that we can have an idea in case we need a specific role and can look through and see if they're interested. But if that doesn't work, we usually we'll ask for referrals from our volunteers. Really, we ask for a lot of referrals from our volunteers. They're typically the best people at recruiting for us, just because they find great people. And if we say we need a copywriter, we just send an email to our organization with a PDF of the role and ask if they're interested, or please send it around your organization and see if we can find one. But it doesn't always work, and once in a while you have someone who doesn't quite fit into the role, and you just have to make do and keep looking for someone. So, but I think overall it's it works out really well for us. We're a lean organization. We put almost all of our money directly into the students, and we serve them well. And our volunteers enjoy volunteering with us. So yeah, that's all I had to say. But yeah, be happy to answer any questions in a bit.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. And thank you, Dave, for speaking about the different ways you engage volunteers in different roles with your organizations. So now we have time for the Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions in the question box if you have not already. And then Eric and I will have Delia lead the Q&A session. And Eric and Dave, if you have any input, feel free to jump in for these questions. And before Delia gets started with questions, she also has some more examples to share about ways you all in the audience engage volunteers. And we think these are really great examples to just share with everybody.
Thanks, Minnie. Yeah, we didn't want to lose these, so definitely have a lot of questions for you guys, Eric and Dave. But first, here's a couple examples from the audience. So we've got volunteers who are cooking for the holidays for a program who serves youth that are currently detained. We have volunteers who are serving on restorative justice panels. I thought that was a really interesting one. Volunteers appreciation dinner. So I think this is more of an engagement strategy, but just someone who's recommending really getting to know volunteers on a more personal level to support them best. We have volunteers participating in outreach activities like tabling at a special event. And then folks who are serving as service learning presenters or project helpers for service projects, especially if your program has more of a service focus. We've got volunteers who serve as chaperones for field trips. That's a good one. And then those who are providing safety education programming. And finally, I thought this was an interesting one. Using technology, volunteers are creating chat groups for program participants to connect. So lots of really, really interesting ideas from the audience. Again, thanks everybody for contributing. So now I have a question. I have a few questions that are a little more specific for Eric and a little more specific for Dave, so I think I'll alternate. Dave, we have somebody who's interested in learning more about the Volunteer Generation Fund, specifically how you have secured those funds.
Yeah, that was in the second year of that, and being a state commission. And I Googled the other day. I know there's other commissions that have received funding for it as well. So it was a request that we wrote, being a state commission. I think it was the prompting of our state office to apply for a grant for it. So it's actually in the Serve America Act. There's legislation for it. We wrote the grant, and so financially, the goals that we had were in alignment with our state service plan and with the focus areas of CNCS in the areas of education and capacity building. So we received, it was $319,183. And then there's a matching investment that we have too. So the total annual program budget was $639,239. So it was just being part of the state commission. We became familiar with it and then put a grant together. And yeah, we were fortunate enough to receive funding for it.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thanks a lot. Eric, this question is more specifically for you, and it's about mentor retention. So folks have been asking a little bit about what do you do if mentors drop off between school years and if they don't show up for events? So how do you kind of manage that? And also how do you retain volunteers over time?
Yeah, I mean, volunteers dropping out of the program is kind of, natural, I think, and it's something we accept. And we have 120 mentors, and we plan to recruit about 60 every year to replace about half of them. A lot of them drop out just when their student graduates high school. It's kind of as much as it's a good time to join the management team, it's also a good time to end the program. But that's usually fine as planned. We do have to drop a couple volunteers because they are not, showing up or not doing their role. And we just talk to the management team people who are in the room with them and can see them. Some of the other volunteers who work with them just to confirm that they're not, basically helping the students. And if that's the case, we ask them, hey, we either give them a last chance, say, hey, you have to do better, or we just tell them, we don't need your help and we'll look for someone else. In terms of how we replace them, at the end of every year, we add new mentors. So if a junior student lost a mentor, we'll replace them with a new mentor. It's not ideal. The mentor will be new and won't know them as long as a more experienced mentor, but it's better than only having one, or definitely better than having zero mentors. So we just look to replace if we can. And in order to keep volunteers, I think it's really some of the things I mentioned: making sure they're trained, making sure they are having a good time both in session and also getting to know the people that we work with. It's kind of like we bribe them with fun happy hours and people to meet, but it works and it makes them happy and makes for good volunteers. So we'll do it.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, thank you. The next couple questions actually are for both of you. We've been getting a lot of questions about training and how your training is different for staff versus volunteers or mentors. So, for one or both of you guys, just curious, how would you recommend that folks go about training mentors volunteers differently or the same from staff? You know, how does training look, and then what resources might you recommend for training volunteers?
Well, for Minds Matter, we don't really have staff, so I can't speak to that. But we don't have much training for our management team. What we do have is resources from the previous person in the role, both written and also verbal. We'll have the previous person in the role just talk them through all the tasks that they would need to fill in their management role. And then we just try to document every single thing that the role entails, all the tasks you need to do to, say like recruit a volunteer, what the application looks like, what you need to check when they, submit an application. Try to just be as detailed as possible and at least document it. For training our mentors, we actually have someone in our organization who is, a professional specialist at this, and she helped design our, training program, which goes through. It's really, a lot of psychology, just how to talk to students. I think a good resource is Mentors Illinois. Not totally sure, but basically just ways to talk to students that are productive, ways to things to look out for, maybe some problems that happened in the past to make sure you're aware of, things like that.
And one of the things that we're doing is, when I mentioned about the regional prosperity zones, and then our relationships that we have for the collaboration for our statewide partners, is just to have that uniformity. And we're in the process now of creating a train the trainer network, just to make sure that the training is consistent throughout the state. So it's just we're offering the training and just capacity building for the volunteer centers, and just making certain that the volunteer infrastructure is increased in those areas, just allowing more citizens to be engaged, to become mentors. So there is, like I mentioned, just that uniformity. So we had Mentor was very helpful with one of the initiatives that we're embarking on, is our national quality mentoring system. So we have a VISTA initiative. I might not have touched on that, but we have a cohort of 15 VISTAs. So we underwent training for the elements of effective practice. For that, we had a few of our consultants that attended that as well. And we're going to build on that training and make certain that the network is prepared, to go to each of those areas. So training is a huge component of this, and obviously we want to make sure that there is that conformity, that the message is being delivered in a consistent manner.
Thank you both so much. All right, and another question we've gotten a couple times is, how do you ensure that your volunteer is diverse, or what recommendations would you give for creating a diverse volunteer pool in terms of career fields, professional expertise, demographic, background, specifically so that you're representing the students that you serve?
This is a kind of a big consideration for us, and something we've been working on the past 2 years, because the demographics of our volunteers do not match the demographics of our students. Our students are about 70% Hispanic, whereas I think our volunteers are about 10% Hispanic. So it is, I think, incredibly important. One thing we've done is really targeted some groups, some like cultural groups within the city. So whether it's like an alumni, a group, there's a lot of alumni groups have like a students of color, subgroup, and we'll look to recruit from them, or we'll look to recruit from other professional groups directly, and just try to send an email to their listserv, spread the news that we're looking for volunteers. But that's a main way we could try to address that. On the flip side, one of the reasons that we have less diversity in our volunteers is because we refer so much on volunteer referrals, which often gets you a lot of people who are similar, especially within similar careers. So while it's usually a good way to get a lot of volunteers, it does have that drawback.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I think just the community approach as well is just being in tune and trying to. We talked about the National Days of Service. That was something strategy for engagement. One of the projects that we funded was in Flint for Habitat for Humanity, and it's pretty impressive the diversity that was involved with this project. We're pretty impressed with that. So I think just the community. I think that aspect is huge. Yeah, it's kind of a difficult question, but there is I think the resources that I included. I was just trying to look through. I think there was a good resource on trying to find diversity in volunteers. So I know it was included in the resources that will be sent out at the end of the presentation.
Thank you both so much.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I know it's something a lot of organizations do struggle with. So folks if folks in the audience have specific strategies that they've used as well, I think that would be helpful too. Feel free to chime in and share. Another person is asking how, like for a very new mentoring program, how do you get started with attracting volunteers to your organization? What tips would you guys give?
So I think one of the resources we use are just online recruiting boards, and post what we do and get people interested. At least a lot of people like Volunteer Match is one. There are a couple of Chicago specific ones, such as One Good Deed. I think that's Chicago specific. And that typically gets a lot of people to at least reach out to you, because that's where they'll go when someone says, I want to volunteer, but I don't know what I want to do. And then the key, I think, is just not only getting them to talk to you, but also taking advantage of that and communicating with them what your organization does. What we do at Minds Matter is we have people on webinars and talk about our organization, and just tell them exactly what we do and what they do in their role, and hope that, one, we convince them that we're, an organization that's worth, spending some time on. And also, two, just making sure that they're interested in joining, and making sure they're not just interviewing and joining the first thing that they see, and hopefully dissuade some people who probably don't belong in our organization.
I would say closely follow the elements of effective practice too. The 4th edition on recruitment, that would be huge. And I said another recommendation too is just with if you do have a state affiliate in Mentor Michigan, of course. I mean, we can assist you with mentor recruitment, but there is something that we have, perhaps you do have familiarity with it. It's the Mentor Connector. And I know Mentor during Mentor Month it's been a huge force in driving potential volunteers to that. But it's only as good as the organization that's receiving the information and following up on that. But I know at Mentor Michigan we received a lot of inquiries that we've been contacted by individuals that have a potential interest in becoming mentors. So. But to make certain that the organizations or the individuals want to volunteer, that they're responding in a timely manner as well, to try to take advantage of that momentum.
Great. Thank you both so much for answering those questions. I have one more question for you. I wanted to also share a tip that we got in our chat box to the earlier question about diversity. It says, we have former students serving as mentors to help with diversity. This, of course, is only if your program is old enough for this kind of turnaround, but we are just getting to the point where the first students we served about a decade ago are college grads who want to now give back, which is an awesome tip. I love that. And that brings me to my last question for you two, which is on a similar note. Have either of you found ways to engage young people as volunteers, and if so, in what roles?
What do you mean by young people? Like the students?
Yeah, so either the students that you're serving, or just some young folks to make sure that you are having kind of a diverse group of mentors or volunteers.
Yeah, so we have our students, our junior and senior students help out by talking to the younger students. One example, we'll have them talk about their summer, program experience to the younger ones. And I think it just gives them a good insight into, if it's their first year in the program, where they might be in a year or two. Another, we actually require all of our volunteers to have at least a college, to have at least graduated college. So we don't have any volunteers younger than that, though we did partner with a local university for a financial literacy program, which I think was run through their, College of Finance or whatnot. And we had a couple of college kids come in and talk about financial literacy.
One of the things that we're doing, I mentioned it in the presentation, but probably went by it real quickly, so I apologize for that. But one of the things that the new Governor Youth Volunteer Award, so we're working with an organization putting together a technology platform that will essentially create a service resume. It tracks youth service hours as well. An individual is able to take with them once they graduate from high school. It includes a signed certificate by the governor, so there is that investment as well. But we also have something, last year was the first time in a while where we did it. It's a youth service poster contest. And we had, this was given out to schools just with the theme of celebrating service in Michigan for middle school and high school kids. And we had a really good response to that. And the winners were supposed to meet the governor at the Governor's Service Awards that we had, but the governor wasn't able to attend that, but Coach Tom Izzo was, which was fantastic. And the kids were able to attend that, but then they also, we arranged for a time for them to meet the governor afterwards. So it worked out really well. And like I said, that was the first year that we had done this in a while. But it's just, as I mentioned earlier, just trying to cultivate young people, the hearts of service that they have when they're young, and hopefully grow up to give back even more. So yeah, we think that's incredibly important.
Great. This is Minnie again. Thank you so much, Dave and Eric. I know we have a couple more minutes before we wrap up, and so I will keep moving along. So these are just some resources we want to share with you all that Dave mentioned, talking about the national service, and also as well as the guide for strategic volunteer engagement, as well as a little bit more information about Volunteer Michigan, which we will definitely send this all out once we put up the slides. And we'll keep going with other information. Mentor kind of scales impacts by developing and supporting a national network of affiliates. These affiliates provide leadership and infrastructure to support expansion of quality mentoring relationships in local communities or statewide. So we really encourage you to find out whether you have an affiliate in your region and connect with them about these local resources and training opportunities such as volunteer recruitment and engagement. And also we encourage you to register your program with the Mentoring Connector, a national database of mentoring programs. And you can also use this database to find mentors or become a mentor yourself. Just some final reminders. 1 week after this webinar, all attendees will receive an email with a link to the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series webpage, where we will post the recording, slides, and additional resources. Also, we really want your feedback, so please, at the end of today's webinar, there will be a short survey. We really appreciate your help to make the series better. Here are ways you can connect with us, and please be sure to visit CMWS page on our mentor website for an archive of all past webinars. Thanks to everyone for joining us today, and please join us next month on Thursday, February 21st for our next webinar on group mentoring. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.